Hey there, today I want to talk about 5 ways you can avoid having your mind wiped by Professor X. My name is Nate, and welcome to the Gamers Guild. So, in case you weren't aware of the new Team Tactic cards releasing with Professor X and Shadow King, among them is a card called Mind Wipe, and it has the potential to be quite a game changer depending on the board state. So, I want to talk about some ways that those of us who are non X-Men playing people are able to dodge it, because it's going to be really good. First things first, let's take a full look at Mind Wipe because it has a lot of text and there's some key wording in there that gives us some loopholes to work with. First of all, it's an uncanny X-Men affiliated tactic card with a reactive timing of whenever another allied character is dazed or KO'd by an enemy attack or superpower, Professor X may then spend 3 power to play this card. Xavier then immediately makes the enough attack at the top of the card against the enemy that made the attack, and I'm assuming or use the superpower. The wording's not there, but it seems to indicate maybe that'll be like a day one errata. Uh, so, anyways, enough is a mystic attack with a range of dash, which is new, a strength of 3, and a cost of 0. There are 4 different abilities attached to this card, since a 3 dice attack on its own isn't really that scary. First, the attack ignores line of sight and range. So the dash doesn't really matter because you have infinite sight and infinite range. Doesn't ignore cover though, which is kind of funny. Secondly, the target of this attack cannot be changed. So no bodyguarding or too dangerous to ignoring or heroes for hiring your way out of it. 3, you get to add dice to the character equal to the damage dealt to the dazed or KO'd allied character. So if Iron Man just used Helios to deal 12 damage to Hulk, well, Iron Man's facing a 15 dice Mystic attack. The fourth and final ability is what can get really gross. If the attack deals damage after the attack is resolved, the target character gains an activated token. If the target character was active, its activation immediately ends. First, how likely is this to actually happen and to deal damage and activate your character? Is this something really worth worrying about? Well, if a minimum 1 damage was needed to daze or KO the enemy, a 4 dice attack against the average 3 defense on Mystic looks like this. So that's around a 65% chance to push through 1 damage against an average defense roll. Now, obviously, different defensive abilities can help augment that, but this is really also just a 4 dice attack. If you deal 3 damage, just how debilitating is this possibility? Well, it's going to give you an activation token about 80% of the time. So, yes, this card can very likely give you an activation token when you don't want it. So let's look at some scenarios that you can try and avoid for the worst possible outcome. The worst outcome that's pretty easily avoidable are reactive superpowers that deal damage or offer up attacks. Characters like Rocket Raccoon with his booby traps, several characters with counter strikes and martial prowess abilities, and of course any retaliatory attacks like Venom So Many Snacks, Winter Soldier's Got Your Back, and so on. Using these kinds of abilities when the character hasn't activated yet can leave them dumbfounded for the remainder of the round, which can be really awkward. Not quite as bad, but is still pretty bad as a character just getting stopped in its tracks mid-activation. Maybe you had an attack that lets you move after the attack is over, or an ability like hit and run. Well, if that attack goes too well for you, maybe you aren't going to be making it back to that secure point you were trying to make it to. Now, maybe you planned it out so that your activation would end after you dazed or KO'd the enemy character anyways, so you aren't too worried about it. But that's still at least going to deny you any extract the enemy you just dazed dropped. Alright, I think I have stressed the point enough that this card can really ruin an activation from seemingly out of nowhere. So, how do we non-mutant players try to avoid it? The first way to avoid it is attack triggers. Attacks often have at least one trigger attached to it, whether it's gaining power, handing out a condition, or something else. But none of these triggers are actually a part of an attack. So finishing a character off with a throw trigger or an explosive trigger to deal some damage doesn't meet the requirement for Professor Xavier to play the card. So a well-timed throw or rockets going off near a banged-up target are going to be a good way to avoid this. The second way to dodge it uses the same loophole as the first, but through Team Tactic cards. There aren't many Team Tactic cards that deal direct damage without providing an attack, which would then trigger it. But things like Terrigenesis or Heroes for Hire are some of the nice ways to get damage through while avoiding the Gaze of Charles. The third way to avoid this attack is one that we'll probably need an official ruling on. But for right now, the line of thought seems correct. Currently, in the forums, there is a ruling on how the Ricochet rule interacts with abilities like Trickster, Lifesaver, or Eye in the Sky that can make an attack end if the target is out of the attack line of sight or range of the attacker. So, Ricochet has a special rule in its targeting that provides an additional range to the attack or targeting purpose, where it can be the target can be any distance from the attacker. However, apparently the timing of these trickster-esque abilities makes the ricocheted make it recheck its original range and line of sight requirements, given this ruling here. So by either getting out of line of sight, or in the case of the shield throw outside of range 4 of the attacker, the attack just ends, and if it was during that character's activation, they would get an action back, but with this reactive card, it doesn't seem likely that Xavier's getting an extra action out of it. Anyway, so it seems safe to assume that by using one of these abilities, you will automatically end the attack, as enough doesn't actually have a range. Now, granted, this is the first time we are seeing an attack with a range of dash, so maybe we get a ruling or an errata that provides clarity on what all it entails. Even if something like this does happen, getting out of line of sight of Charles will definitely still end the attack with these kind of abilities, even if right now it doesn't. Loki can be in his face and avoid the attack. So we'll see if there's a ruling on that. Of the last two ways to avoid the mind wipe, one is super specific and the other is super generic. The generic one is you take out the professor. A dazed or KO'd Charles isn't going to do much of anything, and because of his low defenses, if your opponent doesn't protect him or position him well, an assassination run on him is a quick way to prevent his tactic card usage. The final way to avoid the mind wipe is to just not allow it. Not allow it as in never, not like, please attack in a game, don't never attack. Though I guess that's an option if you really wanted to, so there's a sixth one. But like in a use Emma Frost or Mystique kind of way, since they don't allow reactive team tactic cards to be played during their activation. But that's all I have, knowledge at least, of the ways to dodge whatever happened in Logan. Here at the end of the video, I want to give a shout out to the guild sponsors. If you're in the UK, you can shop at Tritex. Use the code Tritex GGCP5 at checkout for an extra 5% off. And if you use that on a pre-order item like Professor X, that'll save you an extra total 25% off, which is very nice. If you are in the US, you can head to gamechefs.org and use the code GamersGuild, no spaces, to save an extra 15% off of their already discounted prices, which comes out to a really good bargain on your end. However, I will continue to say, if you are shopping from your own LGS, just keep supporting them. We all understand and appreciate that. As well, if you want to hear more things about Marvel Crisis Protocol or Star Wars Shatterpoint, you can check out the Gamer Guild podcast. There's a link to that below as well. And finally, if you are wanting to support the guild, whether that be the podcast, YouTube, etc., check out our Patreon page down below. Just $1 a month or more if you were feeling so generous. It doesn't get you anything, but it helps continue to push projects forward here. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, keep on gaming.